Hello, everyone. Welcome back. The date is 8/4/2015. I am about 12 days away from arrival in Korea. And not a lot has changed since the last video. There is still a lot to do and almost no time to do it. I have about, let's see, today's Tuesday. I have 3 days left of work before I have a week to start getting last minute preparations in place. But I wanted to take some time out to do this second video because I felt like it was one that really needed to be done before I left, just like the last one. So to cut to the point, today's video is going to be all about the process I went through applying to Epik. Um, this is going to appeal a lot, I think, to people who are considering going. Friends and family who are the main target of this video may or may not care because it might get boring, but I am going to be doing it in kind of a narrative form and kind of picking up the story where I left off, I guess, in sort of an autobiographical format. I think that's the most logical way to do it. But two disclaimers before I begin. One is that the last video I felt ran really long. I'm not upset about that. It's my vlog. I'll run it as long as I want. But it did run long. This one's probably going to run potentially longer. I may surprise myself, but I could see this one being longer. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that all of the information I'm going to give is true to the best of my knowledge as of the date that I am making this video. Epik has changed things in the past. Epik will change things in the future, I promise you. So this is a good overview of how I experience the process. Your mileage may vary. And the process could be very well overhauled quite a bit by the time you see this. So don't take my word for everything. If you're considering applying, always check with Epik, always check with the websites. The Korean government is going to be your number one source for accurate information about the program, not me. So in the senior year of college for me was really, really rough. There were points where I really didn't think I was going to make it. And right around that period, I pretty much stopped thinking about Korea altogether. I had just moved to Ann Arbor from Virginia not long before that. I've been here for maybe close to 2 years now. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like I've been here a week. It's a very weird thing. But at that point, I was, focusing on this new job that I had, and it was a lot more involved than the one I had before. And where the one I had before, I could definitely manage going to school full time and, still working full time. This one was closer to what I wanted to do, but it was very much more involved and very taxing, both mentally and physically. So I was struggling quite a bit in my senior year, and by some miracle I made it. But that entire time I was not even considering Korea anymore. I had almost, not quite, but almost had given up on it. I think it kind of got pushed to the back of my mind, and it wasn't a big issue. And then I graduated, and I would say it was probably not more than a week or two after I graduated that it started coming back up. There was just sort of this moment of realization that, oh my God, I qualify now. I can do that. It's no longer just a thing of like one day I really want to do this. Now all of a sudden this is real. If I wanted to, I could start applying tomorrow. And so I talked it over with some close friends here, my roommate and a couple of other people I had met in Ann Arbor, and really debated, soul searched for a week or two about how I wanted to do things. I had made friends here. I had friends in Virginia too. I was anxious about leaving people, but I knew that ultimately I was going to regret not doing it more than I was doing it, no matter how it turned out. Even if the experience turned out to be terrible for me, I think that the regret I would have experienced if I hadn't gone through with it would have ultimately been worse. And so something that helped me along, and something I'll reference a few times here, is that I had a friend up here in Ann Arbor who was also kind of at a turning point in his life. And he he was one of the people I had talked to about this debate, and he, one night just kind of confessed to me. He was like, I don't have too much else going on right now. I'm kind of, he had graduated not long before me, and was sort of working retail and just odd jobs and things, nothing related to his field, and he was looking for something to make his world a little more complete. And he said, he's like me, always had an interest in Asia, and I would say is at least as passionate as I am. And he said, he was talking it over with one of his friends the other day. He said, Richard is thinking about going to Korea. Maybe I should just follow him there. And that wasn't what made the decision for me, but it definitely helped a lot to push me over that fearful edge, knowing that I was going to have somebody that, at the very least, was going to be working with me on the process all the way through. So the next question was, how do we do it? And at this point, I hadn't, even though, in my early part of college, I'd kind of decided it was going to be Jet or Epik. At this point, I was not necessarily throwing out the idea of going private. One thing that me and my friend had decided was that we wanted to try to be in the same city. That didn't end up working out. But we wanted to try to be in the same city if we at all could, and completely understanding that it might not be possible. But we wanted to give ourselves the best chance to do that. So after doing some research for a little while, we decided on a couple of things. One was that I was going to attempt to go Epik, while he was going to attempt to go with a Hagwon, or a private school, for those of you who don't know. And I guess I should fill you in on that if you don't know, but this information is so available all over the internet. A Hagwon is essentially usually an after-school program. Some of them are before school, and they also have adult programs for before and after work, or before and after college classes, things like that. And it's there's Hagwons actually for a lot of different subjects, but English Hagwons, obviously, you're going to learn English as a second language. The environment is quite a bit different. There's different problems that come up with them, and different benefits to them, depending on where you go. One of the advantages of going public over private is that with public you kind of know what you're getting a little bit better in terms of the job itself, and you don't have to worry about things like it being a small company that's going to go under or anything like that, because your paycheck is coming from the Korean government. But with a Hagwon, you really have to do some research, which can be difficult from this side of the ocean. But we decided to do that, and we decided to do it in that way for a couple of reasons. One was that Ian, my friend, had a very good degree, but Epik had changed their standards recently, and he no longer qualified. He would have qualified as a level 3, but Epik started doing level 2 and above, and the difference was that a level 3 could have a degree in any subject at all, and his was a multidisciplinary degree that kind of had a literature/mathematics split. But level 3s could have that kind of degree and be fine. A level 2 needed a degree in a few different possible subjects, or any degree with a combination of teaching experience or a teaching certificate. So me being an education major, I was an instant level 2 for Epik. He, however, did not qualify for this year. So we decided it for that reason. If nothing else, we knew for a fact he couldn't go Epik, and I could. And we decided to go those two separate routes, because if we wanted to try to get into the same city, the best bet was for me to go public and him to go private, simply because then we wouldn't be competing for the same jobs. And there's lots of jobs within the city, so it wasn't necessarily going to be a deal killer. But we knew for a fact he wasn't going to get offered a public job. So if I try to take the public, he tried to take the private, we should be okay. I started the Epik application process, and we both started doing things like applying for the different documents that we were going to need. So, let me explain to you a little bit about what applying to Epik is like. The first thing, obviously, like me, that you have to do is decide if Epik is even something you want to do. And so you need to know kind of the program as a whole, kind of in a vague, broad way. Essentially, with Epik, what you're going to be doing is going to Korea and teaching English as a second language, with a Korean co-teacher in a Korean public school. The age range you will be teaching could be anywhere from third grade through high school, and may also include some training for teachers and other staff. And you don't really get to decide what age range you're going to be teaching. They put you where they feel they could use you and need you the most. You also don't really get to decide what city within the Republic of Korea you're going to be going to, which is a huge drawback for many people trying to decide between Hagwon and public schools. You are allowed to, as of this point, have a preference. I happen to get my preference, but not everybody does. In fact, I know people personally who didn't. So going in, you sort of have to be willing to go anywhere. There's a lot of things about this I'm going to talk about in later videos, but the only thing I will mention here is this. If you're at the stage of deciding if this is something you want to do, before you even decide if you want to go Epik or Hagwon, the first thing you want to decide is two things. One is that you actually care about Korea. And I can't stress that enough. And I am not trying to be a know-it-all. I'm not trying to be judgmental. It's just really important, not just for the benefit of the Korean people, but for your own benefit, that you don't go to a country you don't care about. If Korea doesn't really interest you, if it's just the money, if it's even just the teaching experience, it's really not worth it. There's going to be massive amounts of culture shock, and I haven't even gone there yet, and I can already just tell you, there's going to be. I'm already prepped for it. I know, even as much as I love the country, the culture shock, the homesickness, it's all going to hit. And that can turn the wrong kind of person bitter. So that your students get the most out of you being there, so that the school gets the most out of you being there, so that Korea gets the most out of you being there, and most importantly, so that you get the most out of you being there. Make sure that you know enough about Korea to know if it's even a place you want to be. I mean, you wouldn't move to another city without knowing something, I wouldn't think. Especially not now when you have the internet and you have access to all this information. So there's really no excuse for not going to Korea without some information. That being said, I want to give you the caveat that just because you read about Korean culture on the internet does not make you an expert. Be careful about that, because I see a lot of people making some rather silly assumptions based on one or two sentences they've read. The other thing you want to decide is if education is even a field that interests you. And I'm not going to sit here and say you have to be super teacher, you have to be an education major, you have to want to make education your field, and you have to be the status quo. Let me tell you a deep, dark secret about me. I find a lot of American teachers annoying, and I don't want to be like them. There's a lot of things that we tend to have developed as teachers in the United States that I don't want to replicate. So you don't have to fit in with the general education community, I don't think, to do this. And in some ways, it may even be beneficial if you don't. But the idea of teaching students and teaching them to the best of your ability and making them not only love what they're learning, but learn to love learning, that's got to be something that excites you at least a little bit, I think, to do this and do it well. If this is just going to be a one-year tour of Korea and you have no interest in the actual job itself, please just don't do it. And I'm not just saying that because it will ruin the program, but it will. It will ruin the program. It ruins it for other people. Policies that make it harder for English teachers going over there are the result of people that came before us doing things they shouldn't have done. But even for your own benefit, the reason you're going to do those things is because you're going to be miserable if you don't care about Korea and you don't care about education at all. Hashtag rant. Enough for now. That's all I needed to say about that. Let's say, though, that you've gotten through all that and you've decided that Epik is definitely something you want to do. You want to teach in Korea. You want to teach in the public school system. You don't mind the fact that there's going to be a lot more students than Hagwons. You don't mind the fact that you're going to get paid a little bit less than the Hagwons in many cases. And you don't mind the fact that you're going to have a Korean co-teacher. You don't mind any of this. Some of the other benefits you can expect, and you could expect this even in a private contract, is, of course, as everyone says, free housing. Now, I just want to make the caveat because I don't think it's said very often. There's no such thing as free housing. You got to think just a little bit here. It doesn't exist. The reality is you're getting paid a little bit less so that you can have an apartment. Now, what they do that is very nice is that if you're taking the apartment option with any program, whether it's Epik or a Hog One or whatever, they're kind of taking care of that bill for you. So you're not having to necessarily directly communicate with landlords and work out the rent situation and pay the rent yourself. You're not having to do any of that. The school is doing it for you. You're still responsible for utilities and phone and internet and all that. And I don't want to speak too much on this because I haven't started doing it myself yet, but this is what we've been told, and this is what other Epikers that are already in the country have been telling me for years. That hasn't changed. But provided that you looked at all these benefits and you've looked at what the job requires and you've looked at the country and you still want to go, the first step, obviously, is to apply. The application can be found on the Epik website. One thing that might surprise you is that Epik, generally speaking, does not require a resume. You just fill out the application. Now, excuse me just a second. Quick Mr. Delivery plug. Mr. Delivery for all your home food delivery needs. The application will mostly have information that you'd suspect. There's a few things, though, that I want to point out that may be surprising for Epik applicants, if you haven't been doing your research necessarily. One thing that I think freaks a lot of people out, whether they're applying to a Hagwon or to Epik, is that they require your photograph when you apply. This didn't surprise me because I already knew about it, but I don't think we're used to that in the United States, so I just wanted to give that pre-warning. You have to put a digital photograph of your face, basically passport-style photo, right there on the application. This is very standard practice over there. Don't let it buzz you out, but look professional and take a clean photo, take a good 2x2 passport-style photo. You're going to need a bunch of 2x2s later, which I'll get to anyway. Some questions, though, that come up. Epik has really changed a lot, I think, about how they take in applicants, and I think for the most part that's been a good thing. It's gotten them stronger applicants. There's been a lot of people complaining about how you have to be the cream of the crop to get into Epik. I don't know if that's really true. You have to care enough to either be an education major or go get your TESOL. That's true. It's harder to get into it than it is to get into just, Hagwon XYZ, but we're not the only place that requires it, and frankly, teaching in the public school system should be at least a little bit harder. And that's just my opinion, but it makes sense for us to be trying to kind of weed out people who don't really want to teach, who are more interested in a backpacking kind of experience. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if that's what you're into, Epik's not the route to go. Epik is much more about coming over there to do this particular job, and you will get plenty of opportunities to travel and see the country and see some other countries as well if you would like. But you have to understand that the reason they're giving you this wonderful opportunity is to do the job. So some of the questions that come up on the application are things like, why do you want to go to Korea? You should be prepared to answer this. You should, at this point, have done enough research, or whether you did it intentionally or whether you did it because of just a natural passion, you should know what it is about Korea that makes you want to go. If you have nothing, if you don't have a reason, you're just not ready to apply to Epik, I don't think. I mean, you don't want to go to the country if you don't have a reason you want to be there. So there's that one. Then the other one I remember that was kind of interesting is what would make you a successful Epik teacher. And the third was describe your teaching philosophy. These last two especially are meant to start getting you to understand what it is about education that excites you. Whereas the first question is what it is about Korea that excites you, which is why I started this video off with that caveat. These are the two things you want to consider, because they're going to ask you anyway. and they will see through the lines. People, there was rumors going around for a long time that Korea was so easy to get into. There's barriers to entry, and they need to be there because there may have been a time when it was easy, but now it's become a bit more competitive for good reason. So, if you don't know what a teaching philosophy is, that should be the first thing you look into. I don't know if they teach that in TESOL courses or not because I've never taken a TESOL. I got in by being an education major, so I didn't take the TESOL certificate. If you don't know what it is, definitely look into it. I can do a video on teaching philosophy if I get a request for it. It's a subject I really like talking about, but I don't want to waste too much time on it here. The last thing that's going to be on that application is a sample lesson plan. So, if you have no experience doing anything education related and you didn't learn anything about it in TESOL, guess what? You're going to be put on the spot because they want a sample lesson plan and it needs to be thorough. A lot of questions are going to get asked about this lesson plan in the interview, so it needs to be real. And my suggestion is you don't go to a site that just gives you lesson plans and then fill in the blanks. I suggest you be creative and start thinking about how you want to do things, because if you can't do it here, you're not going to be able to do it in Korea. And again, this is not to sound like a know-it-all, but it's to help potential applicants here with not getting themselves into a bind. I'd hate for you to go over there and feel like you don't know what you're doing. And I think everyone's going to have that feeling a little bit, but if you know how to make lesson plans, I feel like at least that's one less thing you have to worry about. If you can be creative and think through. I can tell you my lesson plan was for a third grade classroom. It was teaching English words related to weather. And one of the things that I did was relate it to a previous lesson that, of course, didn't happen, but that's part of the lesson planning process, is knowing what happened before and what happened after. And I related it to a lesson I had done previously on clothing. So it went rather well. What happens when you apply to Epik is after you get through all this, you do your lesson plan, all that good mess. You're going to submit it, and then you'll get usually an automatic email back. At that point, they may invite you to a Facebook group. The thing about the Facebook group is that it tends to scare a lot of people because I don't think it's something they're used to. What you find is everyone who has applied to Epik at this point has been invited to the Facebook group. Not everybody has necessarily joined, but everyone who applies gets invited. And it's a closed group. You request access. They give you access if they see that your name matches the name of an applicant. And you're in, and it's supposed to be to support each other and, talk about some of the issues you've been having with the application process and to help each other out. What scares people is that the Epik coordinators are admins on the Facebook group. Don't take that too seriously. Don't take it too lightly either, because they will delete posts. They are watching you. And while I don't know how much actually... how much what you say on there actually affects anything that has to do with Epik, I do think that it's enough of a chance that you should monitor your words closely. You shouldn't really have anything to hide, which I know sounds creepy, but if you're a legitimate candidate, you shouldn't have anything to hide anyway. But I have seen some people get grayed out, which I'll explain in a minute, I'll explain it now. As people either drop out of the program willingly or get removed during various stages of the process, there are what me and some of the other people I've met on Epik call the gray death, which is you see somebody's name grayed out on the Facebook page, and that means that they are no longer a member of the group. So what that usually means is that Epik removed them because at some point in the process they were rejected. Either they looked at their application, decided they weren't qualified or wasn't what they were looking for, or they failed the interview, or any other number of things. They could have even asked to leave on their own. But you will see numbers rise and then drop, and then rise and then drop. So, a week or two after you apply, what will generally happen is you'll get an email, hopefully, saying that you've been invited to an interview. These interviews are conducted over Skype. I can tell you a little bit about what happened with my interview. Um, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, which would have been about 2 p.m. Korean Standard Time. And there's a few things about this Skype interview, beyond the fact that it was over Skype, that were a bit odd. One was that my interviewer told me that there was a bit of lag, and so he would be cutting off the camera on his end. This was probably the most intimidating thing that has ever happened to me. I pride myself on being very good at interviews. I'm very good at resumes, and I'm very good at interviews. I learned it from my dad, who is, as I have often said, the Sun Tzu of interviews and resumes. I'm not always great at doing a job, but I'm awesome at getting it. So, one of the skills, though, that I developed through being good at interviews and resume writing and things like that was reading body language, at least enough to kind of indicate if I'm moving in the right direction. When I'm answering a question, I almost always try to phrase my answers in such a way that I'm gauging my audience, and I've gotten pretty good at reading if they're going to like a response or not, and being able to twist it just enough to make it more what they're looking for. And I never lie, but what I do try to do is gauge if this is the direction that the audience wanted me to go or not, and turn things appropriately as needed, and that's what's helped me get through interviews. Without being able to see my interviewer, it was very, very difficult for me. And that's probably not a problem that a lot of people are going to run into, because a lot of people don't take it to that extreme. I'm a psychopath. I don't expect everybody to do that. But for me, it was very intimidating. The other thing that I think shocked a lot of people is that I noticed, this is how I interpreted it at least. My interviewer seemed like half the time he was giving me an interview, and the other half of the time he was acting almost like a coach. And I would find out later there was good reason for that. So to give you some examples, some of the questions that I got asked were things like, what do you think is going to be the biggest obstacle for Korean English learners? What makes you want to go to Korea? You know, things that you would expect, things you may have already seen on the application, things you'd expect to have asked you. The second thing that happened, though, was that he started giving me commentary about my lesson plan. And he liked it. He liked it a lot. He said, this really demonstrates that you have some experience teaching. I think this could be a very strong lesson. But he kept giving me these corrections. And he also corrected other parts of my application, too. There was a few things I didn't round up on the height and weight. Things like, just little things like that he commented on. And then on the lesson plan, he had a couple of corrections for me. He mentioned that my language was too difficult at one point for the age range that I was trying to initiate. He also, what I didn't know at the time was that they don't do public school ESL for second graders. I had made mine designed around second graders, so he suggested I scaffold it up to third. He's like, you wouldn't know that unless you were already in Korea, but that's how it is, so it's probably best you do that. Well, the reason why is because the lesson plans are kind of how they sell you. And what I didn't know as well is that typically what happens is if you pass your interview, as I did, your interviewer or someone else is literally kind of going to be your coach. They become your personal Epik coordinator. Now, that you're not the only one assigned to them. They have like 100 teachers, but you get assigned to an Epik coordinator. For me, it was the person that I interviewed with. I know at least one other person that it wasn't, but I think generally speaking, it usually is. And they are there to kind of help you through the process. Now, with that being said, they're extremely busy during application time, and you can't write them 5,000 emails and expect to get them back. But if you really do have a problem, they are there to help you. After you get approved for your interview, they will say, you'll get an email, and this is important to note. It'll say, essentially, congratulations, you have passed your Epik interview, and we would like to recommend you to an MOE or POE. That's Metropolitan Office of Education or Provincial Office of Education. And what they're saying here is that you're not in, but we would like you to be. So now it's time for you to submit all your documents to Korea so that they can start trying to recommend you. Documents you need include an apostilled, which means notarized internationally, essentially. Criminal records check from the FBI, an apostilled copy of your college diploma, and let me see what else. There's something else really crazy you needed. Oh, sealed transcripts, along with copies of your application, copies of your passport's photo page. Just they give you a big long package list. The hardest things to get, the sealed transcripts are usually easy for most people. If you don't already have them laying around, you typically can just contact your college and they'll get them to you. That's not a big deal. It might cost you, I think it cost me like $15 and I got like 8 copies of mine. Because you're going to need them. What was I going to say? The apostilled CRC is by far the longest one to do. It gets very odd. So a CRC, a criminal records check, the FBI is just absolutely god-awful about getting these things to you. You're going to learn to appreciate the term $46 a lot in this process. So it would have cost $17 to submit directly to the FBI, which we did. Me and my friend Ian, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, we submitted directly to the FBI, only to discover that the FBI was going to take up to 17 weeks to get anything done. So we started getting nervous that we weren't going to get anything done in time to meet the deadlines we were looking at because we wanted to go in late August. We discovered that there's several companies that are approved now to do this apostille CRC through Korea, and for Korea and for anything else you can imagine. They're FBI approved, and they are costly. So basically, it's going to cost you like $46 to $50 something to get these things rushed. But the difference is pretty much worth it, unfortunately, because you're talking about a difference between 17 weeks and 2. It took 2 weeks for us to get our CRCs back to us and then get the apostilled, versus 17 weeks to get the CRCs to us and another week or 2 to have them apostilled. The other thing is there's apparently 2 different kinds of apostille, because there's the federal apostille, which the CRC must be, and then there's a state-level apostille, which is all you need for the degree. The reason I called this episode Encounter at Lansing, other than the reference that if you get, you just got 10 cool points, is that it was, we had to go to Lansing, Michigan to get our apostilles done for our college degrees. What you did is you had to go make a copy of it at a notary, and then sign the copy saying I state this is a true copy. The notary would notarize it. You took it to this place called the Office of the Great Seal in Lansing, Michigan. And it'll be, whatever the capital of your state happens to be, Atlanta or Richmond or whatever, is where you'll most likely go. And I just found it really comical that we had to go to this place called the Office of the Great Seal to get this apostille. And it just reminded me a little bit of The Wizard of Oz with the, ignore this man behind the curtain, because the Office of the Great Seal was literally a little old lady sitting at a cubicle in a room full of about 200 other cubicles. The Office of the Great Seal. It just cracked me up. But it only cost us a couple of dollars for that. But then you want to rush deliver everything to Korea. And once you rush deliver it, you're playing the great waiting game, which is just sitting around waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Let me tell you something that they don't tell you. And if there's nothing else to get out of this video, if you've made it all 34 minutes, then this was worth it. Be psychologically prepared for the torture that Epik will put you through, making you wait and wait and wait, because it's awful. And they don't tell you just how many of these waiting periods there are. So you kind of know at some point that you're going to be waiting for your placement. And what I mean by placement is this. You requested a city on your application. There's a part of the application that says what province or metropolitan district would you like to be placed in. There's a list on their website of the ones you can pick. Sometimes a certain POE or MOE is not currently hiring new epics. Like this last term, Daegu, not hiring. Um, so I put Busan. We chose Busan because it's a big city. It's the second largest city in Korea. It's also a coastal city, which has always been really good for me psychologically. I love being near the ocean, and there was just so much there I wanted to do. There was a huge comics and anime convention that happens every 2 months, which for an American is insane to even think about. There was a massive aquarium. There was this the Busan International Film Festival, and oh man, Busan just everything about it seemed cool. It just looking up its skyline and it seemed awesome. It did have a huge downfall, however, and I don't know if this will still be the same when you apply, but its big downfall was that it paid a little bit less than all the other cities, and they also, where the other cities would reimburse you for your ticket a month after you got there, Busan waited 6 months to make sure you were going to stay before it would reimburse you. So in that way, I kind of felt like I was kind of a good in because I qualified. That was the other thing. Busan also had higher requirements. Even though it was paying less and it was making you wait for your reimbursement, it had more TESOL hours than the other cities did. So that was a big deterrent for a lot of people. And what used to be the most popular, other than Seoul, it was the second most popular city for people to request. I don't know that that's true anymore because of all the heightened requirements and the lower pay and all of that thing. But Busan was attractive enough of the city to me. It was, and on top of that, it was also a ferry ride away from Japan, which was the only other country right now that I really feel like I desperately have to go see while I'm over there. So there was so many advantages to Busan that it was worth taking, a little bit of a financial hit. And it wasn't even to me, the difference was very minor. It wasn't a big deal. But anyway, you put this city down on your application. I put Busan, and then there's a thing under it that says if you can't get this city, would you like to be put into a different city, or do you want to be withdrawn from Epik? Unless you've completely lost your mind, I want to be put into a different city. Now, the rule right now is if you do get a placement and you turn it down, you may not apply for Epik for another, I think, 2 years or something, or maybe it's just a year. I can't remember which, but there is kind of a penalty in that you can't reapply if you don't take what they give you. I think the greater majority of people do tend to get what they want, though. And I think it specifically happens because if they can take you, they want you for that. They don't want to make you unhappy because they don't want you to, mess up on the contract at all. They don't want you to, be miserable. But you do need to go in with an open mind and be willing to work pretty much anywhere in the country if you want to do Epik. If you really absolutely can't risk being in another city besides the one you picked, I'd suggest going private. So the thing is that there's a horrible, horrible waiting period while you're waiting for this placement. And then one day you just... it'll be weeks later, and you've checked your email every single night, and you start memorizing when Korea's business hours are, and you can't sleep because it's while you're supposed to be sleeping. You're constantly refreshing, trying to see when you're going to get that placement, and then one day you check your email, and you don't even believe what you just saw, and you're just like, glory, and you check it, and for me, I couldn't have been more thrilled. I thought I was dreaming because it said, you have been placed in Busan. And so, I forgot though. One thing you do have to know is that when you submit all of these documents, you're at first waiting for the documents to get there, and you're panicked about that, and you think all that's left is to wait for a placement. But actually, they then tell you it'll be about 10 days or so before we've actually processed your documents. And you have to wait for an email from that. And then you start waiting for the placement. And then you get the placement. And then, guess what? You get to wait for your package to arrive, which usually happens very quickly. It happened for me about 2 or 3 days afterwards. And once you've done that, then you have to submit your stuff for your visa. Let me tell you, the visa was the last step. It was the last real hurdle. And it was the most nerve-wracking hurdle for me out of all of it. I thought that waiting for the placement was the worst. The worst was waiting for the visa. This was because of 2 reasons. One, you have to mail your passport. You can go in person, but typically speaking, unless you live very close to a Korean consulate, you have to mail your passport to your local Korean consulate, which for me was in Chicago, which is still 4 hours away. Not very feasible, especially when I'm not driving right now. Um, Mailing your passport is scary. There is one person who got theirs lost on the way back from the consulate, but other than that, nobody had any problems. But it's still very, very frightening. I called the consulate actually because I had submitted mine through FedEx, my application and my passport and all the data they needed, which you need. You get a notice of appointment in the mail, that has to be sent to them, all this stuff. But anyway, I thought I had requested a signature, and FedEx just left it at the consulate's door. So I called that day to make sure it got there, and I got my first taste of trying to speak to a Korean native in English about something really important. And these are the guys that work for the consulate, so their English was supposed to be pretty good. But it was a little nerve-wracking not being sure if what I was trying to do was getting across, because all I wanted to do was ask, did my package arrive? This is my name. Did a package with this name come? And it took me a while to get that message across. So I stayed nervous. I just stayed nervous. And I started accepting the possibility that I wasn't getting my visa until that return tracking. And make sure your return envelope has tracking on it, or you will drive yourself insane. It's also just not safe. You definitely want tracking. That's your passport, man. That's like the most official identification you have. And I'm not going to pick any bones about it, man. They should not be doing it this way. We live in a digital age. There's no reason you should have to physically send your passport to another city through the mail to get your visa. But unfortunately, right now, that's the way it works. And it's not a Korea thing. No matter what country you try to work for, if you try to work in a foreign country, this is pretty much how you're going to have to do it unless you live real close to the consulate. But eventually it did come, and as far as my friend that I mentioned earlier, he got an interesting position because he will actually be working for a Christian international school in Ilsan. So he'll be north of Seoul. We'll be quite a distance away, but if he has a blog or a vlog that he starts doing, I will link you to it. Otherwise, I may update you on a couple of things he does in the future because his process has been a little bit different. And I can tell you, he didn't even start applying until I was already working on the visa. And the Hagwon and private school system with recruiters and all that jazz, I can tell you that moves a lot faster. But that's the basic overview of the system. Is that happens once you get the visa back. All it is you buy your plane ticket. Don't buy your plane ticket till the visa comes in. You're going to be tempted. You're going to see those prices going up and down. Don't do it, because if something goes wrong with that visa, there's a good chance you are not getting that money back. So unless you can get a refundable ticket for your flight, or you just know people in Korea, so you're like, oh, I'll go to Korea in August either way, wait. It's worth it. It's worth the peace of mind. At this point in the process, all I have left to do is transfer some money over so that I go over with some Korean won. I'm set to go. I've got my ticket, 12 days away. I'm ready to boogie, but let me tell you, getting here, the hardest part about the process was just the emotional turmoil of not knowing, of waiting and waiting and waiting. And your coordinators will tell you everything in Korea tends to get done at the last minute. Be ready for that. The main reason I wanted to make this 45-minute long video is just that, to let you know, you think this video is long, your wait time is going to be longer. Get started on paperwork early. Submit for the CRC early. Make sure it's something you want to do. Make sure Epik's the program for you. And just get ready to hunker down. Keep up with it, but hunker down, because it is a long process. And there are so many times, man, I didn't think it was going to happen. And I wish that I could go back and tell my 16-year-old self, my 18-year-old self, my 20-year-old self, that you did it. There are so many times I didn't think I was going to, but I did. And you will too, if it's something you really want to do. But just know the process could take a bit of a toll on you, and just hang in there. So that's all for now. That wasn't so long, was it? It was only over twice as long as the first video. If you've made it this far, I'll tell you that the next video is going to be the day that I leave. So when you come back to see To Boldly Go, you're going to see footage of me actually leaving for Korea and landing in Korea, and if I do everything exactly the way I want, you'll get your first footage of me actually in Korea. So it's all going to be about the trip over, and that won't be for at least 12 days, because that's how much longer I got to go until I'm out. Until then, peace. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.